they're more likely to feel part of this city or being neighbourly than if they're the kind of outsider. So I think there's a particular thing about Shenzhen that actually contributes to this. And also, I think the continuities thing, comparing Hong Kong with Guangzhou, I could compare it, the same questions to places in the USA, cities in the UK, and what you see is a surprising consistency, actually. There's variations on the responses, but it's not that dissimilar, actually, which shows a certain kind of, again, it goes back to what I said, things don't change as much as we think. There's a kind of, whether it's Guangzhou or Hong Kong 15 years ago, or indeed London 30 years ago, or New York, you get similar responses, actually. Income, class, sense of belonging, well, I think in terms of kind of policy issues, I think in somewhere like Shenzhen you can see that home ownership seems very important to how people see themselves in terms of their stake in the system, their feeling of being at home in Shenzhen. And income and class also matters, that there is this relationship that's developing between high income and higher social class feeling a stronger sense of belonging to a place than people who are lower down the social scale. And also there's, I think, finally the usual caveats. I mean, I think pretty generalized from Shenzhen to other cities. Well, to a degree you can, I don't know. I think you'd have to ask the same questions now in Beijing or Shanghai. And also, you may feel, I don't know, some people in the audience may have a view of this, I do feel a slight concern that if you ask these questions in Shenzhen, there's a kind of pressure to say positive things. Well, I think if you ask some of these questions in, I come from Bristol, and people would moan about the city. Oh, but it's terrible. Things have got much worse, Now, Shenzhen, of course, it's a dynamic place. There's lots of job opportunity, income's going up. But I also feel perhaps the kind of cultural, political context. There's a feeling among people that they perhaps ought to err on the positive side, rather than moan about places. But nonetheless, that's just a kind of caveat that I think is an interesting kind of question. So that's all I want to say, I think.
I think we'll do what we did yesterday and just have 5 minutes or so for some quick questions or comments.
Thank you, Rick, for the very, sorry I lost my voice a little bit, for the very interesting and informative presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. And I have one question and a comment. The question is that it feels to me that the culture or the dynamic of Shenzhen actually based upon the demographic combination, that most of the people actually are migrants. And still, that Shenzhen has a very short history, so by now, most of them are still migrant from other places. But based upon the history from other cities like Hong Kong or many other big cities, it seems that it's unavoidable that the city gets old, and also a lot of people who born there, they are local, right? So is it likely that there will be a localism that the Shenzhen cannot avoid in maybe the future 20 or 30 years? That unavoidably it will face problems that maybe, I hate to say this, but Hong Kong is facing. And also the comment is that about your comment about why people tend to be positive. I think it's not because of cultural political thing, but it's because most of the people who went to Shenzhen, they are like they're personally driven to go there, and they once they decided to go there, it's kind of like they decided to adapt to the local rules. So that is just my opinion. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. On the second point, you may be right. I mean, it's partly, I've always found in Guangzhou and doing research in mainland China, response rates are so much higher. If you try and do a survey in Hong Kong, because, well, how much are you going to pay me? It's very difficult to get a high response rate, and indeed in the UK it's very difficult. So there's a tendency, and I assume because sometimes they're seen as official somehow surveys, maybe people are more willing to respond. On your first question, yeah, I mean, I think localism comes in different shapes and sizes. I mean, there's a strong feeling of localism about people who live in Edinburgh. We feel, in fact, well, I shouldn't talk about Scotland because it's in a similar discussion about independence. But I mean, I think the issue about, I think obviously, the question, I mean, only 6% of people see themselves as locals at the moment, and I can't remember, it's about 30% Shenzheners. I think, you know, localism doesn't necessarily result in any kind of social unrest. I think there's I mean, governments want people to feel a pride in their city, don't they? And cities spend huge amounts of money now branding themselves, you know, so that people feel, I belong to Glasgow, or I'm proud of being from Vancouver, or you know, so I think governments promote that. So it's getting the balance between, if you like, love of city and love of country and love of region. You know, there's people can have multiple identities, right? So I mean, I take your point, but I you know, I don't see that really. I mean, I think the government wants to promote more people feeling Shenzheners, but I don't think that necessarily will lead anywhere in terms of any kind of.
I didn't mean to lead to any social unrest, but I mean to, you know, once they feel that they are locals, it might be against the migrants because the competition for welfare or this kind of things.
Okay, kind of locals not, perhaps, you could be right. I mean, there is an element of that already. I mean, I think there's an issue about, I remember going to a talk, this is a few years ago actually, I think it was the Deputy Director of Housing in Shenzhen. It was about, do we build more social welfare housing, you know, housing for poor? And the message was no, because we don't want to attract too many of these kinds of people. You know, we want high income PhDs, we want, so in a sense there is an element already of what kind of people we want to move to Shenzhen, what people we don't want to move. So I think I take your point, you know, about, you know, that obviously the longer the history of a place, perhaps there's more a sense of belonging, and that can be double-edged, you know. It can be double-edged. It's just like a neighborhood, you know. People say, oh, we want people to have a strong sense of belonging, but they don't want neighborhoods. People say, we don't like strangers. So it's that kind of tension. It's always there, I think, to manage.
Okay. One more question, and we have to move.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your interesting research. And I care more about the methodological issue. Could you explain more about your sampling process? Yeah.
Right. It was carried. Well, it was the detail now. Yeah, sort of. I mean, I say it's 1,000. It's 1,000 interviews in 4 neighbourhoods. They were selected in terms of, they were proportionate to the size of the districts. And we selected, I can't remember exactly how we selected the floor level, but also we interviewed the person whose birthday was nearest to the date of the interview, as long as they were above the age of 18. It was carried out by an organisation, they have a different name, Dataway, which is one of the leading survey organisations in China. So it's a pretty sophisticated sample. It was, I mean, sampling, well, you know, survey research in China is always challenging because you've got to go through an approved agent. So we're very lucky to get Dataway to do this for us. And of course, we're going difficult now. So
That's a quick.
Great. Just about the methodology. How did you find neighborhood?
I have to show you the Chinese. I mean, it's still to this. I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to tell you the wrong thing. So I need to actually. I have got a document that shows how do you translate neighborhood into Chinese, because we've had a long discussion about it. Because as you'll know, it can be interpreted if you use the wrong translation as the people who live on this floor, as opposed to in this area. In somewhere like Shenzhen, it tends to be seen as in this block, actually. This block, because high-rise environments, people look at neighborhood differently from if you're in a low-rise environment. But so there's a challenge about high-rise, low-rise, but there's also the issue about translation, which I'm very well aware. It is particularly complicated to translate in English Chinese. Sorry.
Okay, maybe a follow-up question. Because what kind of neighborhood? Because do you make a distinction between, like, for example, like migrant enclave or native community? Because they totally different attitude towards the case of.
No. I mean that's true. No, I mean this was a random sample across these 4 districts. So we didn't we didn't select by neighborhood type. In the Guangzhou and the Hong Kong ones, we did actually. I mean, I think in Guangzhou it was a work unit area, it was a traditional inner city neighborhood, and it was a commercial commodified housing estate. So they're very, but not this one. This is a random sample.
But we have to move on. Thank you very much again, Ray, for this inspiring talk. I don't know what just happened. Usually people don't get excited when you talk about methodology, but you all just woke up. Our second speaker this morning is Professor Shafiqul Huque, who I think is the person in the room that traveled the furthest, because he is actually from a university in Canada. And as I learned yesterday during dinner, he's not only a very prolific writer. If you look online, he has written many books on development studies. He's an expert on Bangladesh. He's also written on migrants and Asian immigrants in North America. But he's also a very old mentor of our Vice President, Professor Carl Mock. So I think we're very happy to have him here with us. And finally, you might have seen this little booklet about the social policy research that is happening at Lingnan. Very happy to say that Professor Huque is now also a visiting professor here at Lingnan University. So hope to see you around more often, and I'm very excited to invite him to the floor. Thank you.
Do I get rid of yours, right? Thank you. Thank you, Stefan, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. And I have a few disclaimers to make at the beginning. First of all, I am not a social policy expert, although I did co-edit a book on social policy in Hong Kong in 1997. Since then, I haven't really looked at social policy issues for a long time, so I'm learning a lot from all the presentations yesterday and today. And the second disclaimer is that Stefan had listed the different kinds of experts who have spoken here. So I am in a new category. My primary interest is in public administration. I also study public policy development. And unlike all the presentations here, this is not based on empirical study. This is the reflection that a person has at the end of his career. So I have been studying development and governance for a very long time. And at the end of all these years, I know that I still don't know what these concepts mean. So that's something that I want to work with. So what I try to do here today is ask you to relax, forget about the exciting presentations, take a deep breath, and see what I have to present. What I basically do is look at these two concepts very carefully. Development and governance, which have been my inspiration as well as punishment all my life. And then I look at how they're interpreted, how they're applied, and how they really do not function. And the other difference with all the other presentations is they start with questions and answer them. In the end, I begin with answers. This is what development is, this is what governance is, this is how things are done, and I end up with questions, how we could study them. So my background on development and governance spans different regions. So I have studied Bangladesh very carefully. I've studied South Asia. I have studied Hong Kong and also some other regions. What I try to do is identify issues and problems and present to you the challenges we can face in researching development and governance. So there are challenges in every kind of research. And for us, development, students of development, it's always an issue of having genuine, reliable data. They mentioned about the difficulties of getting data. I remember when I was here, I tried to get information and interviews from some of the government departments. They were very kind and polite. They sent me a stack of books. So all we have to say are in the books. But in New Zealand, they were very keen to join and participate and tell me their stories. So in developing countries, this is a very common issue. There is the challenge of distinguishing between government data and non-government data, because sometimes there are wide discrepancies between them. And also the risks involved in using one set of data against other. So along with those risks, we have a few other points that I would like to make. So both development and governance are very popular research topics. If you search the literature, there are thousands of studies. Everyone likes development, everyone likes governance, and the interest is apparently more in people from developing countries because they are interested in digging into the roots of the problems that the country faces. Many of these studies examine the definition and interpretation of development and governance. My problem is that there is no clear consensus of what one or the other means. You can find diverse views on the importance of what it means, of what it implies, and what results can be achieved from them. So everyone agrees that it is important. And why do we have those confusions? This is just a preliminary conjecture. I think there is an overly flexible approach. And again, coming from the government sides which want to indicate that they have been progressing, sometimes development and governance are very, very loosely approached. And the other problem comes from researchers like us who select and interpret concepts to suit their arguments. So I would pick those ideas that will be supporting my arguments. As a result, these different approaches and ideas make it difficult for analysts, more so for governments, or the policy community, even the practitioners, to determine strategies and policies for leading to development and ensuring good governance. So even with all the good intentions, the results are not as expected. What challenges do most states face these days? The first issue is institutions, because these provide the basis on which a country is governed. And establishing and continuing with political and social institutions obviously is one of the key tasks of modern governments. it becomes even more difficult because of all the changes taking place across the world. And with the advent of globalization, changes in one place have an impact on a number of other places. And governments have to deal with them, although they have only limited control over the changes that take place. In addition, developing countries have their usual range of problems, so they have to come up with ways to eliminate or reduce poverty, deal with crime, corruption, violence, terrorism, and all kinds of other problems. And as civilization grows, more and more issues and problems are emerging. And of course, at the basis is the interest and need to provide decent life and essential services to the citizens. And many countries, even developed countries, are facing the stiff challenge in providing all those services. And finally, it is the issue of the responsible of the international community, because all nations are now involved in the international order, and therefore there are standardization of practices, standardization of procedures that will make states react to them to keep up with the changes. How are these challenges addressed? There are different tools and strategies, and sometimes governments shift their ideology with change of governments, but normally there is a range of strategies. So the first thing would be state-led initiatives that are aimed at promoting economic growth, which is related to the creation of opportunities, providing public services, and in general, improving the quality of life for citizens. State-led initiatives, we know that have their limitations, and therefore we have this new way of thinking that the private sector is probably the best vehicle. So strengthening the private sector to assist the state with these tasks is an important issue. But what is more common is to see a combination of state, non-state, and external actors working together to achieve those goals for the government. So with that background in mind, we can take a look at the concept of development. It became a major subject of study in the 1950s, I would say after the Second World War. Although, if we look back in history, the spirit of development has always existed. People helping people, monarchs trying to provide services and essentials for their subjects. Of course, there was the interest that the population had to be kept at ease in order for the ruler to continue in power. So there was some element of altruism, some element of self-interest, but this is not new. But development as we know it now emerged with Truman's inaugural address in 1949, which gives a new dimension, because he declared the intention to share the benefits of technological and knowledge advances with the less advantaged parts of the country, of the world. And this was followed by a declaration of all kinds of programs to assist poor countries. And the first thing was obviously to help countries recover from the ravages of the war. And a second objective was probably to keep the channels of communication open with former colonies and countries that could be useful later. And around that stage, the goals are relatively easier to identify because the concept of development was very was oriented towards one direction. And those are the simple days. Citizens did not have a lot of demands, and over time, the number of goals increased, and the metrics for assessing development became more and more complicated. And the reasons for confusion are also found in the different pathways to development, because after the war, the world was split up into different camps. So we know about the first world, or the free world, which followed a liberal democratic system, which was in favor of free market and capitalist economy. And this would entail one way for development. Then there was the second, or socialist world, which followed a different path towards development. So we needed a controlled political system, a socialist economy that would ensure the basic necessities for citizens. And there was a group of countries that fell outside the first or the second world, the free or the socialist world, and this was bunched together as third world countries. So they were open targets for the two major camps. So they were looking at mixed political and economic arrangements and getting assistance from the two major powers. There was a fourth system that emerged briefly, the non-aligned world, which also followed a mixed system, but they were more or less inclined toward the first or second world. But they did not play a significant role in shaping ideas of development. So it was mainly the socialist versus the capitalist approach to development. So what were the outcomes? The outcomes were, even if we look at it today, there were some advancements in some areas, but the quality of life has declined in both developed and developing countries. And then when I say that, I mean for specific groups. There were some improvements in reducing poverty, better health facilities, higher per capita income, higher rate of literacy, but overall quality of life, even in some areas of the United States, is considered to have declined. And the other consequence of development efforts has been there are always groups that are situated in a position where they can take advantage of all these assistance coming in, of all these rewards offered by the developed world. And this has actually increased inequality. There is higher level of uncertainty, and of course added to that we have new issues like climate change, which has put citizens at a more vulnerable position. So the bottom line is that even after 60 years or more of practicing development, the results are not impressive. Earlier, the focus was, as I said, on economic growth, on per capita income and industrialization, but later we found that there were, particularly with the Human Development Index adopted by the United Nations, there is more and more emphasis on the other sides of development. So I put up two quotes here which says that development does not only mean moving from agrarian to industrial system, it means moving to a more humane, relatively prosperous, environmentally safer, and politically more inclusive arrangement. And Todaro and Smith also pointed out the need for increasing availability and distribution of food, shelter, health, protection, levels of living, range of social and economic choices. So these views highlight the importance of social policy in development. Governance is also another concept that is very, very popular. Everyone loves governance. But if you look at the literature, corporate governance is actually much more popular. There is so much written about corporate governance because this is an area where there is more interest and probably more problems.